Okay, good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait for about a minute so that we can make sure that everyone can be there at the start of the program. So just give us a minute and then we'll start the program. Thank you. Okay, I think we've given enough time. Hopefully, we have enough people joining us now, and more people will continue joining as we proceed. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us around the world to our program today, our webinar titled The Deal and the Delivery Mastering Incoterms and Logistics in 2025. I'm going to be your host for today. My name is Mzingai Ndubiwa. I'm a global market analyst at Tridge, and we have a very interesting program prepared for you today. We're going to have a very comprehensive presentation coming your way, and we've managed to gather a panel from around the world. So it's going to be quite interesting. And let's get started. So I'm sure most of you know us by now, but at Tridge, we are a trusted intelligence provider for agri trade. And we have quite a number of services that we offer. So we do have a fulfillment service solution that we offer, an export solution as well, which is a B2B marketplace. And our main services right now, we have the Tridge Eye and the Tridge Pay. We will be getting into more detail about the Tridge Eye as we continue with our program, but basically it's an intelligent system powering daily agri-trade decisions. And we also have the Tridge Pay, which is a secure escrow service for cross-border transactions. And this is in partnership with Deutsche Bank. So this ensures a high level of security and reliability. So we will be sending a certificate to the participants of the webinar. So in order to receive a certificate, please fill in the survey that will be shared with you during the presentation, and the certificate will be sent to you along with the webinar in about 2 to 3 business days after the program. So please pay attention for that survey. I will be sending it to you on the chat in a few minutes. And our agenda today will be as follows. We will have 3 main sections. So the first two will be part of our presentation. The first part will be titled Decoding the Deal, a practical guide to Incoterms 2020. The second part, Navigating the Delivery, Logistics, Challenges, and Solutions in 2025. And then we will proceed to our panel discussion. So in our panel discussion, we've collected 3 notable questions on the topic, and we will address each question with our panelists. We have three panelists that will go through those three questions. Following that, we will have a Q&A section. Hopefully, we do have time for that. So I implore you during the presentation to share your questions in the chat section. Try and keep the questions in line with the topic of discussion, and we'll try and address as many of them as possible. Those that we fail to address, we will send you emails with responses following the conclusion of this program within 2 to 3 business days. So, again, I'm your host, Zingai Ndubio. I'm a global market analyst from South Africa. And joining us today, we're going to have Alper from Turkey, and he's our regional manager and global supply chain manager from that region. And he has a very exciting and comprehensive presentation lined up for us. We also have three panelists. As I said, we have a healthy mix today. So we've got Kevin Lopez from Colombia. Then I've got my sister Wanjugu from Kenya, an account executive from there, from the Maasai tribe in Kenya. Is that true, Wanjugu? I heard that they fight lions, but maybe might not be true. Then there's Ben Latahan from South Africa, also known as Benjamin. There's a long story there. Then we'll be going into our main discussion right now. Alper, please give a brief introduction, about 30 seconds, just introducing yourself. Although you're a regular for our webinars, we have you all the time. Please just introduce yourself, and then you can go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, MZ. I'm Alper Akkurt from Turkey, and I'm the regional manager trying to cover the regional countries for our platform activities. So let me start with the slides. So what are Incoterms and why they matter? So let's start with basics, but they are far from basics. Incoterms, or international commercial terms, are issued by the ICC and are used globally in trade contracts, but they are more than just definitions. They form the legal and practical backbone of your logistics chain. And they define who does what, who pays for what, and most importantly, when risk shifts from one party to the other. Think of Incoterms as your trade safety net. If you're a trader in, for example, Banatyasti and shipping dried apricots from Turkey to Hamburg, or a buyer in Riyadh importing Turkish pasta, Incoterms define where your responsibility ends and the others begins. And they reduce confusion, and in global trade, confusion is expensive. And they are updated every 10 years to reflect how trade evolves, like a software upgrade for your contracts. And Incoterms aren't just terms, they are risk management tools. And K Incoterms 2020 updates. The 2020 updates reflect modern trade pain points. Let's highlight just a few. FCA now allows the buyer to ask for an onboard bill of lading. This was a huge issue for letter of credit users in countries. And DAT is now DPU because delivery may happen anywhere, not just terminals. And insurance in CIF and CIP. CIP now requires broader coverage, and that critical for high value Turkish cherries, for example, going to Asia. And Xfers and DDP still valid, but not practical in most cross border deals. For example, many Turkish exporters still use Xfers, and we see the same dispute again and again. The buyer couldn't pick up. One of the less visible but important changes in 2020 was around security obligations. They were better defined to align with global frameworks like CTPAT and AEO. Think of these are trusted trader programs. If you are compliant, You get faster customs, clearance, fewer inspections, and lower risk profiles. This is becoming even more critical with today's geopolitical and port congestion issues. In cost and risk allocation chart, and this is where Incoterms get real money and risk. Let's simplify. Exports seller does the least. The risk is with buyer from the seller's warehouse. FOB common for Turkey's seaborne exports, for example. Risk transfers when goods are loaded. In CIF, seller pays for freight and insurance, but risk still transfers at shipment. DDP, seller does everything, including duties. Risk stays under the goods until the goods are at the buyer's door. And when choosing an Incoterm, don't just look at the price. Ask yourself who takes the hit if there is a problem at Mersin or Jebel Ali port, we can say. And common mistakes in Incoterm use. Now, some of the most frequent and painful mistakes we see. CIF for inland destinations. You are paying for sea insurance, but cargo gets damaged on a track from the port to a Konya city in Turkey, for example. Who is liable? You guessed it, no one wants to be. A common mistake assuming CIF includes unloading, it doesn't. CIF only covers cost, insurance, and freight to the port of destination, not unloading or terminal handling. Experts without logistics support, a buyer from Egypt, for example, tried to pick up under experts in a region with strict customs controls, I can say. The result, 3 days of delay and cold storage charges, all because they underestimated the local clearance processes. And price only selection, a bad fit on Incoterms can turn a good deal into a loss, and wrong Incoterm can undo months of negotiation. Don't let a three-letter term ruin your margin, I can say. And a base comparison with OFOB and CIF. Let's look at a real case from an agri-food world. A Turkish exporter shipped 100 metric ton of onions under FOB Merchant terms. The buyer vessel was delayed 6 days. The sealed container sat at the port in extreme summer heat. By the time it arrived in Kuwait, some onions had sprouted and rotted due to prolonged exposure. And the buyer withheld payment, blaming cargo condition. The seller insisted the risk had transferred at 4 point, and they ended up in a legal dispute over who was responsible. Had CIF been used, the seller could have arranged a ventilated container, and insurance might have covered the loss. So this kind of things happens often, especially with perishable cargo. Incoterms define who loses money when there is a delay. And let's go to the next one, navigating the delivery logistic challenge and solutions in 2025 and key challenges. And we are entering one of the most complex decades for global logistics. Freight costs are still volatile, fuel demand imbalance, and congestion isn't going away. US, EU ports, and of course, the Red Sea. Containers are not where they need to be, and insurance costs are climbing. Red Sea security, strikes in Europe, climate risks. These aren't isolated. A shipment from, for example, Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam to Rotterdam may now take 12 to 14 days longer, and as vessels reroute around the Cape of Good Hope to avoid the Red Sea. And yeah, this kind of problems is going on because of the war in the Gulf region. or Middle East, we can say, and need trade routes and market shifts. So what are companies doing? They are rerouting through Africa, from Vietnam to Gulf, overland rail from China to Turkey and EU, and via Mexico to access to the US market. So they are avoiding Red Sea choke points, but rerouting isn't just about geography, it's cost, compliance, and speed. And what can we do? Scenario planning. With instability in K corridors, you need to evaluate alternative transshipment hubs. And what is the delay risk? What is the cost? What impact? And scenario planning means staying one step ahead, I can say. And tech as a game changer, predict, plan, and adjust. That's where logistics is heading. And Tri's role in supply chain visibility and logistics intelligence. Uh, this is where Trish comes in, right? We don't move your goods, but we move your decisions forward. So Trish I offers real-time visibility from shipment routes to alerts on disruption zones. Trish Pay provides enforced secure payments, so trust doesn't delay trade. And fulfillment services, warehouse, customs, last mile coordinated and globally. AI-powered decisions avoid the delay before it costs you, and spot risks before they bite, I can say. In 2020-25, logistics success is not about faster vessels, it's about smarter planning. And if we need to wrap up, okay, takeaways, the right Incoterm is not a checkbox, it's risk strategy. And trade in 2025 requires agility, intelligence, and visibility. Smart fulfillment needs smart partnerships, and don't wait for a disruption, plan for it. And logistics used to be about reacting fast. Now it's about knowing first. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Alper. It was quite comprehensive. Really appreciated. Um, I also liked the in the beginning where you were talking about the key FCA updates and just keeping everyone up to date as to what the current standards are and the common mistakes. I think this is very vital, especially for those traders that will either be penetrating a new market or utilizing a new route, in order to understand um, what Incoterms might be more successful in that particular situation. And then also it was quite interesting to hear about their current challenges and what type of solutions that traders can try and utilize in order to not get caught up within the current logistical uh, disruptions and challenges. So thank you so much, Alper. Really appreciate it.
Just to add, there is a one mistake as well.
Okay.
When the buyer is getting copy of BL, they think it's okay. They should buy physically before making the last payment. They can change the BL information on all other documents when the vessel is on the way. So they have to be very, I mean, very very. They have to check everything. About the trade. Before before making the full payment. So this is also a risk for the buyers. I can add.
Yeah. So basically, they have to be very meticulous. They have to check every aspect of it
Yeah,
before they go ahead with it. No, thank you very
yeah.
much, Alper. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. And then I'll kindly implore the attendants to please post your questions in the chat section. We'll do our best to get to every question before the end of the session. If not, as I said earlier, we'll send you the responses within 2 to 3 business days. So now we'll be moving forward to our panel discussion. And as I said, we have three main questions. that we will be addressing. And the first question is, from your experience, what is the single most common and costly mistake businesses make when selecting an Incoterm for their sales contracts? So we'll just begin with you, Kevin. Maybe you can just give a brief introduction to yourself and then go ahead and answer the question.
Thank you, MC. Yes, let's talk about the Incoterms, but firstly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kevin Lopez. I'm from Colombia. It's now for me 4 years within Trich, doing several job duties. I started in fulfillment solution, and then now I'm switching into the platform sales for Trich, and it's a pleasure for me to speak about the Incoterms in this webinar today. So, regarding your question, MC, the mistake that I see most often is thinking that the Incoterms really define ownership, and that's not what they do. Definitely, Incoterms are all about who pays for what, who handles which part of the transport, and exactly when is the risk transferred from seller to buyer. Or legal title of the merchandise or cargo is a separate matter, usually handled in the sales contract. So now, the costly part comes when a company picks an Incoterm without fully understanding what it means in real life shipping. So, for example, I've seen people use FOB for air freight, which is incorrect. FOB only applies to ocean transport, and using it the wrong way creates sort of confusion over who's responsible if something happens to the cargo at the airport, which is a real different operation from a port to the airport. So that confusion can lead to an insurance being denied by the seller or by the buyer, depending on what type the issue is. So another case commonly seen is exports Incoterm. So which seems simple because the seller just delivers the cargo at their facilities, but this can cause problems. If a foreign buyer agrees to exports, they are responsible for export formalities at the country of origin, which is difficult if they are in the seller's country, right? So that can cause customs issues or shipments delays due to the unknown process in the origination country. The real issue is that Incoterms are often chosen by sales or legal teams without taking in consideration or checking the logistics or trade compliance teams. Without checking this, obviously, Incoterms are a harsh matter to handle. So the term gets written into the contract, but it doesn't match what the company can actually do on the ground of logistics and transport. And at the end of the day, Incoterms should be chosen based on what is the best equipped to handle risk and logistics, depending on the different links on the supply chain. When that doesn't happen, then companies face delays, disputes, and extra costs that they didn't expect in the reality.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. We'll move on now. Ben, could you please give your perspective on the question and just a brief introduction of yourself before you begin? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, sure. My name is Ben Lautechan, and I'm a global market analyst at Tridge. I haven't dealt with shipping and cargo at Tridge itself, but in a previous role I held, part of my responsibilities included being involved in the export of fruit and wine. So I guess that's where my expertise for this webinar comes in. So to the question, I concur with what Kevin said. I think one of the big problems that um, big issues in the logistics chain is a fundamental mismatch between the chosen Incoterm and the mode of transport. Kevin mentioned that FOB, for example, is just used for ocean freight. But even there, it can be misused when it comes to ocean freight. So terms like FOB and cost, insurance, and freight, CIF, can be misused when it comes to ocean freight. The Incoterm rules and regulations are quite clear. FOB and CIF are designed for situations where the seller is responsible for physically loading non-containerized goods like bulk grain or oil directly onto a vessel. So then the risk officially transfers from the seller to the buyer when the goods are on board the ship. The problem comes in when you work with containerized goods. In those cases, the cargo is typically handed over to the carrier at the terminal or the container yard. And this often happens days before the vessel even arrives. Now, in cases like that, if you use FOB, you create a dangerous risk gap. Like the seller hands over the container and he loses control over the container at the terminal. But under FOB terms, the seller is technically still liable for the container until it's loaded onto the ship. Now, if that container gets damaged, it gets dropped, or it gets stolen within the terminal itself, then you enter a legal and financial nightmare. The question becomes who's responsible. Now, the seller is contractually liable, but they have no operational control over the container or the goods. And this can lead to immense costs when it comes to lost goods, legal fees, and insurance disputes. So the correct term for containerized freight in this case would be something like free carrier, with some of your other options being carriage paid to or carriage and insurance paid to. Now, with free carrier, the risk transfers from the seller to the buyer when the goods are handed over to the carrier at the named place, which would often be the container yard or the terminal. Now, this simple change closes that risk gap between free on board, where responsibility changes hands on the ship, to the container yard, and this aligns with this would align the contract with the physical realities of dealing with goods and prevents a very costly mistake that I guess inexperienced buyers and sellers can run into. And another thing that Kevin touched on is it's very important to keep in mind that Incoterms simply refers to the risk involved and the transfer of risk, and has nothing to do with the ownership of the goods. It's very important to include the transfer of ownership in your sales contract. The Incoterm simply refers to the transfer of risk, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind here. Thank you. Wanjugu, I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Wanjogo. I am the account executive for the African market. I help with expansion in this region. So Kevin and Ben have really touched on what I wanted to say for this question. I think just an additional point is that for me, the common mistake I've seen, which I think has been mentioned by both Kevin and Ben, is that many companies, especially the smaller exporters or new players, which is who I deal with most in Africa because I deal with SMEs and SMBs, right? They default to using copy-pasted terms and conditions, right? Because you don't want to go through line by line of a contract to see exactly what's happening. We may not even understand fully the terms, right? But the important aspect of this is that you need to be aware of who's responsible for what part of the process. right? For example, someone might assume that they're using CFI and the goods are covered by insurance all the way to the buyers to the warehouse. But in reality, CFI insurance often covers just the minimum and stops at the port. So here, what we want to really advise our small SMEs, SMB, and new players in the market is don't copy paste intercoms into your contracts. Take time to map out what the journey of the goods and decide who is the best place to handle the risk at each place. So to handle the risk, to handle the cost at every stage. Even small oversights can really cost thousands of dollars in damage to the buyers, and also just cause relationship damage, right? So I think the most costly mistake is using an intercom without understanding its practical impact. Always align the terms with your logistic capabilities, your buyers' expectations, and all the realities in the route, just so that we are clear on who is responsible for what. As it has already been mentioned, the big mistakes here really cost millions. And so it's important to really understand who is responsible for what insurance will cover, and each part of the journey being mapped out. I think one of our services, Tridge Pay, we really try to analyze and help with that, so that by the time there is a full agreement, we are seeing who is, before we release. Tridge Pay is just an escrow service that we have here. So we ask some of these questions to just make sure that we know who's responsible for what part of the process, so that when we are releasing the money complete transaction, every part has been taken care of, just so that we're not having a bit of a back and forth for I don't know who's responsible and so forth and so on. I think I'll just add that because majority of what has been already said.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wanjuku. And I think what you said was actually quite vital. The understanding the aspect of responsibility, and therefore the scope of what your insurance can cover. And I think on the most part, if you're dealing with the route that you're used to, if nothing out of the norm happens, then you don't get to deal with some of the fallback from any problems. But once there's a problem, like you're saying, it can be $1 million problem. So the responsibility is quite key. Thank you so much for that. We move on to our second question. Could you walk us through a real world example of how the choice between two different Incoterms, for example, FOB versus CIF, dramatically changed the logistical planning, costs, and risk for a shipment? Ben, you can start and give us your wine perspective.
Sure, I'll do you one better. I'll work wine and fruit into the same answer. Yeah, I think the best way to answer this question is to compare two products that I have had the pleasure of dealing with from a South African perspective, which would be wine and fruit. Now, the choice of Incoterm for each creates a completely different business reality, right? For wine, in a lot of cases, we would typically deal with free carrier terms. So in essence, we would just have to deliver load the container and deliver it to port. So yeah, with wine, our logistics planning and risks, it was relatively contained. Our primary job was to ensure that the wine was loaded correctly at the winery, the export documentation was correct, and the container was delivered safely to the carrier at the port, which was typically in Cape Town. So our responsibility effectively ended there. The buyer was responsible for the main ocean freight. If these were shipments overseas, we typically shipped wine to Europe. They also had to cover the insurance for the voyage, and then also had to deal with any risks at sea. So we didn't have to monitor the container's condition across the ocean or worry about shipping schedules, port delays, anything like that. So this approach meant significantly less planning, lower costs on our side, and then also a clearly defined and limited risk profile. We were in essence just acting as a producer and supplier, and not as a global logistics manager. But when it came to fruit, it completely flipped the script for us. So it's a completely different ball game when it comes to fruit. So shipping fresh fruit typically required us to use terms like delivered at place. Now, under these terms, we were responsible for the product's conditions throughout the entire journey. So right up until it was delivered and inspected at the destination port. We typically shipped fruit to Europe, so it would often go to the port of Rotterdam. And this dramatically changed various aspects of your planning and risk. So the first aspect would be cost and insurance. We had significantly extra costs. So we had to pay for the ocean freight, and as well as purchase comprehensive insurance to cover high value and high risk cargo. It also changed the planning and monitoring. So yeah, to kind of become a cold chain expert, if you will, from a producer perspective. So this meant placing monitoring devices in your container to track things like temperature and humidity. So you're kind of actively monitoring your shipment from thousands of kilometers away in the case something went wrong. And risk was probably is the biggest difference here. So fruit is highly perishable, unlike wine. So every single day of delay, whether this is port congestion or other challenges, erodes the product's shelf life and its value at the end of the day. And since we were responsible until delivery, that risk is entirely yours, even though a lot of the risk management is out of your hands. So a shipping delay could wipe out the profit of a shipment. So the choice of Incoterm, driven in our case by the nature of the product, completely transforms your role in the global logistics chain. For wine under FCA terms, we could focus on being a producer, whereas for fruit under delivered at place terms, we had to be a full service logistics provider at the end of the day, or at least have knowledge of your entire supply chain. And this comes at far greater cost, complexity, and exposure to risk at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you for that, Ben. That's quite interesting. Just to ask a question, with the fruit, was that citrus?
It was citrus, and then pears as well, and probably the most tricky one would be nectarines. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Kevin, do you want to add something to that? Give your perspective in South America?
Yeah, yeah. I'll refer in for this question to a real case happening within Twitch. Well, in the past, we worked with a Colombian exporter, green coffee exporter, who was shipping with us green coffee to a buyer in New York. The contract we used was CIF New York, which means that the seller arranged and paid all the ocean freight and insurance to the port of destination. When the shipment arrived, the buyer got hit with unexpected forfeits, like the terminal handling charges, and the document releases fees from the shipping agent stated that it wasn't included in the contract of transport made from origin, right, made in Colombia. Then the buyer thought all costs were covered under CIF, but these extra charges were definitely not included in the seller's freight agreement. On top of that, there was a delay because the shipping documents weren't ready on time for custom clearance, which caused storage fees at the port of destination. So both sides were frustrated, including us. The seller thought that they had done their part by delivering to the port of destination in New York, but then the buyer felt that they were paying extra for things that they didn't agree to it in the transaction. So for our next shipment, we switch to FOB Buenaventura in Colombia, port of origin, and this means that the seller was to get the cargo onto the ship in Colombia. Then the buyer took over the container onto destination. So the buyer arranged the freight with the regular provider in New York, I mean the freight forwarder, and then handled customs on an easier way. And this gave them a full control over local port charges, and everything moved faster this time, and there were no surprises in other coasts. This example is very simple and shows how safe CIF can hide fees at destination that sellers don't control or sellers simply don't know. In ports like New York or Miami, these charges can be high and vary a lot. So it's money sensitive when we deal with this type of fees that are hide hidden between the contract of transport. So by switching to FOB, each side managed the part of the shipment they knew the best, and it can obviously reduce the cost and obviously reduce the risks in the joint operation between the two companies.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. That was quite an interesting example. I think it goes back to the point that Alpa made in the presentation about having this meticulous nature when you're selecting which Incoterm to use. Make sure you know what costs are available at each stage. So that's quite useful.
Right.
Wanjugu, do you have an African example for us?
Yes, absolutely. So the one that stands out for me was a Kenyan exporter that we worked with who shipped dried fruits. Kenya is a big exporter of dried fruits. So they were shipping these fruits to Europe. So they were new to exporting and had agreed to sell under the CFI terms, thinking it would be more attractive to the buyers because it would include freight and insurance, right? Now here's where it got tricky, right? The things got delayed at the transshipment due to a port backlog that was there, and by the time they arrived in Europe, some of the goods had lost their shelf life value, which is really important for fruits, right? So the buyer assumed that the insurance under CFI would cover the losses, but the exporter had only purchased basic marine insurance, which did not include for things such as delay and spoilage, and of course for the shelf life value. So, of course, what happened is that a dispute followed. The buyer blamed the seller blamed the freight forwarder, and in the end, both parties lost trust. The exporter had to cover the part of the losses just to preserve the relationship. So if they had used FOB, the buyer would have handled the shipping insurance, right? They could have chosen the coverage they preferred and had full control of the shipment after it left the port in Mombasa. That's where the port in Kenya is. It's in a place called Mombasa, right? So they would have handled it there. So, more importantly, the risk would have passed to the port of origin, which is the one that really caused the issues about the delay, and the expectations could have been made much clearer. So, this shows how the intercourt decisions can change who carries the risk, who arranges insurance, how much control each party has. And it's just about cost, right? It's about planning and protecting yourself, your company, and the reputation. So I think the lesson here is you always have to think beyond the freight quote. Look at who has the knowledge, who has leverage, how and who has the network to manage the risk at each stage, and let that guide your intercore choices because it really, really matters where the liability lies and what can be done. So that's really the lesson for such things, that we must make sure that we are looking just beyond the freight quote.
Okay, thank you so much, Wanjugu. And we'll just move straight to our third question. So the question goes, looking at the current state of global logistics, how is technology, from real time tracking to data analytics, changing the way businesses can manage their shipments and mitigate the risks outlined in their chosen Incoterms? Ben, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So in my opinion, technology is no longer just a tool of convenience. It's become an essential mechanism of risk mitigation, and it directly impacts how we manage and enforce Incoterms. It's transforming our ability to move from a reactive to a proactive and predictive stance when it comes to global shipping. So first, let's talk about enhanced visibility. In the past, if you loaded a shipment or a container onto a ship, it effectively entered a black box that you had no visibility over until the goods arrived on the other side. Now, today, real-time tracking using GPS and IoT sensors provide a constant stream of data. So we can monitor not just the container's location, but its internal conditions as well, such as humidity, temperature, and even whether it experiences shock, like being dropped or handled roughly. So this is critical for Incoterms. For instance, under carriage paid to, risk transfers at origin when goods are handed to the first carrier. So if an IoT sensor detects a temperature deviation before that handover, the data provides undeniable proof that the liability rests with the seller. If it happens at sea, it's the buyer's risk, and they have the immediate data needed to file an insurance claim. So it makes the abstract point of risk transfer tangible and verifiable at the end of the day. So this is especially important when working with perishable goods, such as agricultural commodities. There is a lot that can happen to shipment of agricultural commodities during a sea journey, for example. So secondly, we're moving beyond just tracking and into predictive analytics, especially with the advent of AI. So AI-powered platforms are now aggregating data from carriers to ports to weather systems and even geopolitical events to give us better information that we can proactively act upon. So an example of this is the movement platform by Project 44. These systems don't just tell you where your shipment is, it can predict where it will be and what the best course of action will be if there are stumbling blocks, challenges, or delays along the route. So they can forecast delays due to congestion at the port of origin, or they reroute shipments to avoid dock worker strike, for example. So for a buyer using delivery duty paid terms, this allows their logistic partner to proactively manage customs and final delivery. In the case of an importer using ex works terms, who is responsible for the entire journey, these predictive tools are invaluable for planning resources and avoiding costly demurrage and detention charges, for example. So in essence, technology is providing us on-the-ground data to enforce contractual obligations of Incoterms and gives us the foresight to manage the risks before they escalate into costly disruptions. So I think that use of technology is becoming mandatory when dealing with logistics, global logistics, and monitor or enforcing Incoterms.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I'll go ahead to Wanjugu.
I really agree with Ben, right? That technology really, really is has become really transformational in the way that businesses manage logistics and especially how they navigate the risks tied to intercom. So let's take a real-time example for tracking, right? Before technology, once your shipment left the port, you'd be in the dark until it arrived. But now platforms like ours, Tridge Eye and others provide end-to-end visibility. You know where your container is, where the delay is, or if it's likely to miss a connecting vessel, right? That's huge because if you're using terms like, CFI, DAB, all that, delays could mean that there is damage or late delivery penalties, right? But with real time tracking, you can take action early and reroute and just be proactive about what can be done next, like notifying the buyer or you escalate that to the forwarder, right? Then there's data analytics. Of course, Tridge is really good with that as well. Businesses are starting to analyze their own shipping history and making market data to identify patterns. Which ports have the most delays, which shipping lines are more reliable, when is the best time to avoid congestion? These kinds of questions will give you insight on how to choose the right intercom. Because you can match the terms and the risk with the profile of the route, right? So at Tridge, of course, we work with clients who look at logistical data before even quoting a price to buyers. They consider which interco makes the most sense based on the buyer's location, the customs bottleneck, the ports that have a history of delays, the insurance needs, and so forth, right? That's a very different approach to a few years ago. Ultimately, technology is helping shift us from being reactive or proactive or just being in the dark and not knowing what to do, right? It's just about the tracking shipment. It's about making smarter decision before the shipping even leaves. And when you align with the right interco, it becomes a real competitive advantage. And of course, as I've said earlier, it's really, really important to use data analytics, right? Because then you'll be able to avoid ports that cause delay. You'll be able to notify buyers. You'll be able to escalate things before it gets to a place of a lot of delay. So that's really what I think technology can help with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you, Wanjugu. Kevin, do you want to close us off?
Yes, I want to. Well, Wanjugu and Ben have definitely walked us through the real and advanced technology aligned to the Incoterms. So I'll be speaking of the, I'm sorry, of the basics. And yes, technology is definitely making it easier to see what's happening during shipments and how to manage risks more precisely, which is key when working with Incoterms, and this can be perfectly aligned in a fulfillment or export import operation. For example, with real time tracking, both seller and buyer can see where the cargo is at any moment and even check conditions like temperature or if the container was even open, which is an alert of which is pretty. This is important because Incoterms define exactly when risk passes from seller to buyer. And now we can track at the moment more accurately, even what that transfer of risk occurs. So companies are using data and tools to compare how different Incoterms affect their shipments. They can see how cost, transit times, and possible delays change depending on whether if they use FOB, CFR, or DAP, for example. So this helps them to choose the turn that fits best with their logistics structure. Some are even testing smart contracts with blockchain, where the system automatically updates when certain steps are completed, like loading the cargo or delivering at the agreed point. That can trigger payments, for example, or insurance cover. So this makes definitely the whole process faster and more reliable for either part. So in short, the technology doesn't change what Incoterms really mean to be, but it makes it much easier to apply them correctly. Track them and track the Incoterms in real time, and also solving problems before the Incoterms and codes get even more expensive.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you to the rest of the panelists for your responses and for your in-depth explanations of what's happening in your different regions. It was very useful and very practical for us to get an idea um, of the current landscape and how different scenarios can be navigated through. Okay, we will now quickly go to the Q&A section. We've received quite a number of questions. Thank you so much for all of you that have asked questions. We will try and get to as many as we can. Those that we are unable to answer, we will send you responses within 2 to 3 business days. Okay, so we'll start with a first question from Princess. I'll try not to pronounce the rest of the name, Princess. Please forgive me. Incoterms is the risk management between international buyers and sellers, the conditions and terms of the contract. What is the difference between EXW and DDP? Alpa, do you want to try and help Princess with this?
Sure, MZ. Yeah, that's a great question because these two terms represents the two extreme ends of the risk and responsibility scale in global trade. Ex works means the seller does the absolute minimum and they make the goods available at their factory or warehouse. And from that moment, the buyer is in charge: transport, export, paperwork, customs, insurance, everything. And imagine walking into a warehouse, picking up your goods, and being responsible for getting them across the globe. On the other hand, we have DDP, delivery duty paid. This is the most buyer friendly term. The seller handles everything, not just the transport, but also all taxes and import clearances. The buyer just opens the door and receives the shipment fully cleared. So, in short, X works, buyer does all the work, DDP, seller does all the work. That's why understanding Incoterms is really about understanding risk control and trust between buyer and seller. And now, one common confusion we often see is between experts and FCA, especially when FCA is applied at the seller's premises. It's true that both can at the factory gate, but there is a key difference. Under exports, the buyer is responsible for export customs clearance, which can be tricky in some countries. Under FCA, the seller handles export clearance, even if the handover point is still their own warehouse. So export is physically simple, but logistically risky for buyers who don't know the exporting country's rules. And just to clarify, in Incoterms alone do not form a complete sales contract. They define delivery terms, but other essential elements like pricing, product specifications, payment terms, legal jurisdiction, and dispute resolution still needs to be agreed in the contract itself. And I can highlight, I mean, there is one more question from Princess, I think, to why the new trade routes and master shift is in Africa and in Mexico. So yes, but in part of Africa, like South Sudan or the DRC, we can say Democratic Republic of Congo do face serious instability. But when we talk about trans-African corridors, we refer more to the infrastructure push along relatively stable trade routes like the east-west highways across Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, and Ghana. And Mexico, Vietnam, and Gulf ports are seen as alternatives mainly because they offer predictable port infrastructure and proximity to key markets, even if they are not risk-free. So it's about balancing existing risks. When the Red Sea becomes unviable, businesses look for least bad alternatives based on time, cost, and risk tolerance, I can say.
Okay, thank you so much, Alpa. Um, Thank you again for everyone who has joined us for the webinar. We will just stretch it just for 5 more minutes so we can attend to one or two more questions. So please kindly bear with us. We'll just extend for 5 more minutes. So we'll move on to the next question by Princess again. How the trade finance global market and integrate the climate and geopolitics challenges in the management of Incoterms. Kevin, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's a great question, and it's very current trended topic in Incoterms. So I think trade finance is now more closely linked into Incoterms risk points with climate, concerning climate and geopolitical risks. Banks and insurers assess where the risk are being transferred, and especially in unstable regions or climate-prone zones. So, if a shipment, for example, under CIF or DDP passes through high-risk areas, considering these aspects, uh, then the cost of insurances are tend to be higher, in the financing terms tends to be more or tends to be stricter. So it required some more added guarantees that it's no more traders choosing this type of incoterms that can lead to even expensive rates when it comes to trade finance or when it comes to insurance. So in short, finance decision now consider incoterms, the route and the risks that all the environment uh, have together. So using the right Incoterm can reduce financing costs and help the management to internally shock and tackle this type of risks that can arise within the supply chain.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I hope that answers your question, Princess. We'll move on to the next question. Okay, so this is from Chukwemeka Namti. And the question is, can LC be used for air shipment? So Ben, since you did speak about some experience with that, do you want to answer the question?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. I'm assuming in this case LC refers to letter of credit, so I'm going to go off of that assumption. And yes, a letter of credit can absolutely be used for air shipment. So letter of credit is a flexible payment method that can essentially be adapted to any mode of transport, whether it's air freight, sea freight, road, or rail. Like the fundamental process remains the same. The buyer's bank issues a promise to the seller to pay them, provided that the seller presents specific documents that comply with the letter of credit. So the primary difference for air freight lies in the required transport document. So for air shipments, the central transport document required is the air waybill. One important thing to consider here is that unlike a traditional marine bill of lading used in sea freight, an air waybill is a non-negotiable document. This means that it doesn't confer title to the goods. It simply identifies a specific party to whom the airline must deliver the cargo. So because an air waybill is a non-negotiable, care must be taken when structuring the letter of credit to protect the interest of both the bank and the buyer. In this case, it's important that the airway must be consigned to the issuing bank to prevent the buyer from picking up the goods and not paying their bank. So yes, it is absolutely can be used for air shipments. Just take into account that the airway bill is a bit different than a marine bill of lading. So it's a little bit different in the different things to take into account.
Okay, thank you so much for that response, Ben. I think this is as much as we can get to during this particular webinar. We will try and answer the rest of your questions and send you the responses between 2 and 3 business days. So we will attend to them. Thank you so much for the presentation from Alpe. Very great presentation. Thank you for that. Thank you again to all our panelists for joining us today. Really appreciated your responses. It was quite a comprehensive discussion, covered quite a lot of aspects. And would like to thank all of you that attended this webinar. We really appreciate it. Please continue to attend our monthly webinars. We will continue to bring you very interesting topics and discussions. And the contact details have been shared in the chat section. So please feel free to reach out to any of our panelists if you have any questions or if you'd want to engage in, any of our services. Please also, visit our website to get a clearer overview of the services that we offer here at Tridge. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.